Good afternoon, everybody. It's Chris, and welcome back to the show. I got Tom Eishman, here with me, author on the Civil War. How are you today, Tom?
I'm doing well.
Great, man. Thanks for coming on. Why don't tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what got you interested in the Civil War?
Well, I got interested in the Civil War at 5 years old.
Five
My
years
parents
old.
took a trip from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Norfolk, Virginia to see my brother was in the Navy, and we stopped at Gettysburg. And to be honest with you, the only thing I remember about Gettysburg then is my dad took me up what is now called Longstreet's Tower, and he pointed me out to the west and said, "See those buildings? Yeah, that's President Eisenhower's farm." And I still, in my mind, remember those buildings. And when I first went back in '86 to Gettysburg as an adult, and I climbed up that tower, I knew right where to look for Eisenhower's farm from memory. So I thought that was kind of weird. But
how far is it?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I've always heard about that. His farm's right there in the little town, or
No, it's west of Gettysburg. So
okay.
The tower is on West Confederate Avenue on Seminary Ridge, and his
Okay.
farm is a couple miles to the west.
Got you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's right. In '74, when I was in the Army, I read Killer Angels. And
I think I've heard of that.
So, and when I was in college, I did some more research on it. And, I fell in love with Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, like everyone else. And, I thought The Killer Angels was one of the most accurate fiction books I had ever read. And he did say he condensed some of the action. I just realized till later how much he did condense.
You would have thought the whole battle centered around Little Round Top.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the most important part of the battle, of course. And, what really I get people when I go out and do book signings from my book, Courage on the Little Round Top, the first thing I ask people is how many Chamberlain brothers were at Gettysburg? That tells me how much they know about Gettysburg, because Michael Sherrill left out John Chamberlain. He was visiting his brothers. He was in the Christian Commission, and he went with them to Little Round Top. And right when they were getting ready to put the regiment in the line, Joshua sent him to the rear to take care of the injured. In a special, in a secluded place.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and it was a great thing. I write historical fiction, but I spent 5 years on the research for Courage on the Little Round Top. And because when I went back to Gettysburg in '86, went to Gettysburg, first time as an adult, first thing I wanted to go was find where the 20th Maine was. And back then, it was all overgrown. And there was a little sign was positioned on the avenue at Little Round Top, pointing towards the east and said 20th Maine position. And the trail was so small, I had to push leaves out of the way to get down there. And I got down there and looked at the 20th Maine Monument, and I looked at the whole thing, which means on the east side of the monument, you got to hang out over the edge of the rock to read it. And I did that and saw Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's name. And the first thing I wondered was, who was the people that attacked them? Who was the officer Chamberlain captured?
I think those were some of my Alabama boys.
Yeah. So the 15th Alabama, and took me 6 months to find that Robert Wicker was the officer that Chamberlain captured.
Robert who?
Robert Wicker. He was a junior second lieutenant in Company L of the 15th Alabama.
Wow.
15th Alabama had 11 companies. Most regiments only had 10, but they had 11. And so I started looking for him, and I found his family. I found him on the census records, and found the agricultural census for his family. So I knew what his farm was like, and I knew his father owned one slave. And
wow.
Yeah. And then I ended up getting a hold and talking to his granddaughter. She was still alive. She was 86 years old at the time I was doing this. And she didn't know little about her grandfather. He left Alabama after the war, after his wife and young son died. And he joined the rest of his family in Wichita Falls, Texas, and he died at 36.
He was only 36?
Yeah. The family farm got flooded by a huge flood. They had the family had to climb up in the trees to keep from drowning, and they lost everything. So any writings that they had from Robert were lost.
Wow,
Yeah, it makes it a little hard. But his granddaughter had a pin that her mother had given her from the East Alabama Men's College. And so I had a clue, and I tracked that down, and that is now Auburn University. And in Auburn University, I found the school records. And in the school records, I found who he boarded with. And so it gave me things to talk about.
That is some more research there. I'm quite impressed.
I also found that he was a member of the Prote Guards. He was from Prote, Alabama. And the Prote Guards was started as a militia unit after John Brown's raid. Most of the southern states towns set up militia units. So the first units that were formed in the first Alabama came out of those militia units, and Prote Guards was put in as Company A of the first Alabama, and they were sent to Florida, and he spent some time down there in Florida is guarding some of the areas where there was a Union fort on the Gulf Coast. I forget which one it was. And then he went back to Prote to help organize another regiment, and they formed a Company L for the 15th Alabama.
That's some research right there. I'm taken back by that. So just you said Company L, 15th Alabama.
Yeah.
Now that's the one. He's the one in the movie that Chamberlain captures, right?
Yeah. Okay. So in the movie, he looks like he's in his 40s. He was a 24-year-old. He was 24, just a college student. And so, did they parole him after that, or did he go to? No, he went to Johnson's Island.
Okay.
He spent the rest of the war in Johnson's Island. They returned home, got married, and he married a cousin of William Oates, who was the commander of the 15th Alabama. And in fact, Company L had two cousins of William Oates in Company L, and so I used that in my novel because you have family dealings, between the Seller cousins and William Oates. Sometimes they didn't treat as I wrote it, sometimes they didn't treat their commanding officer with as much respect as you think they would, but they're cousins, family first. So
tell me about this courage on Little Round Top. Is that just on the second day? Yeah.
Well, I started the day before. 15th Alabama spent their time on the first guarding New Guilford, the rear of the army. They got up at 3 a.m, then they marched into Gettysburg. 20th Maine was going to camp at Hanover. And they got word to go ahead and march to Gettysburg, and they got within 3 miles of Gettysburg. They marched till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's funny with the 20th Maine and 5th Corps. There were rumors going around that McClellan was in charge of the army again.
I've heard that.
And then there was rumors that the ghost of George Washington was leading them to Gettysburg. So all kinds of rumors going around. So then 15th Alabama was, of course, they were part of Longstreet's attack, but they were not part of the counter march. McCall's division was first in line, and they did the counter march, and Hood's division actually never got to Fairfield Road until after McCall's division passed on their way back. And then they joined behind.
On the second day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was not part of the counter. So what time did they go into the fight?
Around 4 o'clock, 15th Alabama ended up. That's when they started some fighting. The 20th, when the guns started firing and Meade realized that there was going to be an attack on his left, they moved the 5th Corps to the far left.
What time would you say that was?
Excuse me?
What time would you say that was?
It's still... So when you start talking about time, you gotta realize that anybody you listen to about time, nobody had coordinated their watches. Nobody's time was really accurate. You know, you hear from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and nobody knows for sure.
That's what I was just getting your opinion on, because when we have our Gettysburg discussion, that's gonna be one of the main fights on the second day about what time Longstreet got his orders and what time he went into the fight, and you're gonna hear, anywhere from sunrise to 11:30, and
yeah. And if anybody tells you they know exactly what time it was, they're lying. They have no idea.
Because they talk about the sunrise meeting between Longstreet and Lee, and I said,
yeah,
only 2 people know what was said right there.
Right.
So I don't know, but it's always a fun one, so I look forward to that. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get you off.
Oh, no. I like questions. I can start rambling along all the time, but I like questions. So, Hood's division got in position, and the 20th Maine was in position, ready to go into the fight in the wheat field. And General Warren, Meade sent Governor Warren to Little Frontop to look for what was going on. It was up on the single station, and he went up there. And I found the officer that Warren sent down to Devil's Den. They were already firing on artillery that had set up near the Bushman farm. Confederate artillery had set up there. And they were firing some long. And in the woods behind that artillery was the Texas Brigade. And the Texas Brigade got pretty upset that the artillery set up in front of them, and now the artillery from Devil's Den was firing long into the trees above them. So they weren't real happy because they were hidden. And there was a delay in getting the advance going, and there was a delay with Law's Brigade as part of Hood's division. 15th Alabama was Law's Brigade. When General Law got over there, he looked at Big Round Top and thought, oh, that's interesting. And he sent a squad out of scouts to see what was over there. And they got around Big Round Top, and they got all the way to Taneytown Road and saw their wagons there. And they came back and reported and said there were no enemy troops on Big Round Top, and he could get around behind it or fortify it. So General Law started pushing Hood to move his brigade to Big Round Top. And, that took time. And, it went to Longstreet, it went to Hood, Hood went to Longstreet, and Longstreet cut down the idea. So it was time to advance. Now, Law spent all that time trying to get the orders changed. He forgot to give his regiment any orders. And when the attack came, they went straight because they didn't have orders to go anywhere else. The Texas Brigade, the left flank Texas Brigade, was ordered to stay on the Emmitsburg Road. The right flank was ordered to stay with Law's Brigade. Law's Brigade, instead of angling basically towards Devil's Den, the focus, they went straight towards Big Round Top. And after the advance, as the advance was happening, Hood's Texas Brigade got split in 2. So the attack started badly at first. As the attack was starting, the artillery on Devil's Den, Devil's Den fired towards the left, and Warren up there saw that there were reflections, and it's really what reflection there was. Who knows? It could have been just one guy reflected, but he saw that how far beyond Devil's Den the attack was coming, and he sent for help.
So, I'm sorry, Hood's division, did part of it get mixed up with McLaw's?
Well, what happened was there was some overlap, because when Texas Brigade got separated, there was a hole in the line. So Anderson and Benning.
Anderson, that's the name I was trying to think of.
Yeah. So Anderson and Bennings, who were support, Benning was support for Law's Brigade. They were in the line behind. They filled the hole. And then Anderson was on the left of and helped with the other section of the Texas Brigade. And they ended up just kind of going past and linking up with McCall's division.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
So the Vincent's brigade is near the wheat field, ready to orders to go in. And Vincent sees a rider riding in front of him, recognized him as a courier, rode out to him and demanded what his orders were. And he goes, my orders to find General Barnes. And Vincent said, that's not what I asked you. What are the orders? And he said, take a brigade to Little Round Top. And Vincent told him, go ahead and tell General Barnes that's what I'm going to do. So that's how the 20th Maine ended up on Little Round Top. And the funny thing is, when you ask people how the 20th Maine get up on Little Round Top, there were 4 regiments in the brigade. And you can find first-person accounts on the 20th Maine being the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th Brigade up on the hill.
Now, Little Round Top was not even an objective for Hood, correct?
No. When that it wasn't an objective for anything because there were no troops on it.
So how did this, unfold? Did they keep throwing, regiments and companies one after the other for this little hill that wasn't even an objective to start off with?
So what happened was when Warren saw how far the line was on the Confederates, he realized that if they kept coming, they were going to end up on Little Round Top.
Okay.
And they were going to end up on Little Round Top because Law didn't give his brigade orders, and they were going too far to the east before they made their turn. So instead of attacking Devil's Den, they were attacking towards Big Round Top. And then the 15th Alabama, they started to make their turn towards Devil's Den, and there were some sharpshooters behind a wall up on Big Round Top. And you can find the wall. It's in the woods now, which makes it hard to tell the battle-wise, because at the time that was right about where the tree line was. And they fired on the 15th Alabama, and Oates decided he needed to clear them out. So he went after them. And the sharpshooters, they were smart. They split and went around the hill. They didn't go up it. Oates didn't see him, so Oates kept going and went all the way up the top of Big Round Top. And now the 15th Alabama had sent out canteen detail. And the canteen detail started coming back to catch up with them, and they saw where they went up into the trees. And they got to the tree line. Now where you go? I'm not sure where they were. While they were talking, the sharpshooters came back and captured them all and got all the water. So the 15th Alabama went in combat without any water.
I remember hearing that story now. Yeah.
So they got up on top of Big Round Top and they rested there. And Oates is looking around and decides this is where he wants to stop. They get up at 3 a.m. They marched over 20 miles. It was a hard forced march. They didn't have any water. So he decided he wanted to stay there. And a courier from General Law came and found him. Now, Law wanted to take Big Round Top. Oates has Big Round Top, right where Law wanted to go. And the orders, though, from General Law was to find the flank of the Union Army and turn it. And at that time, the flank of the Union Army was on Little Round Top.
Wow. Okay.
Now, for people who watched PBS series The Civil War by Ken Burns, there's a really accurate statement that Law made, that Oates made in this book, War Between the Union and Confederacy. He said that I could turn this position into a Gibraltar. With a few more troops and chopping down some trees, this would be amazing position. In the series, he was talking about Little Round Top, and that's why he charged Little Round Top. In his book, what he actually said was Big Round Top. This is where I wanted to stay. I could turn it into Gibraltar. The only reason why he left was he was ordered off to find the flank.
So in the movie Gettysburg, we see, I can't remember the guy's name, the man playing general, coming back arguing with Longstreet, move up the big round hill. And that was Hood they showed in the movie. But actually Hood was motivated by Law, and Law was motivated by the squad he sent around and did recon around Big Round Top. So that is, I've had people say that wasn't accurate. He was talking about something else. That scene right there, would you say it was close to being accurate? Or that's what Hood was talking about?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay.
And see, a lot of General Law did not write a report on his brigade. So there is no official documentation about what Law was doing. But I found in an article he wrote for the Southern Historical Society, he wrote about what happened. And of course, he didn't say he forgot to order his troops what to do during the charge, but Oates is real detailed about what happened in charge. So when you read them together, you can easily put together that, Oates didn't have orders. Law had to catch up with him and turn most of the brigade towards Devil's Den. And that's where Oates was supposed to go, but then he got fired on the rear and he went up Big Round Top, and the 47th Alabama was ordered to stay with him, and they went up Big Round Top too.
So when Hood was talking to Longstreet in the movie, were they actually wanting to go around the hills? He says, let's move around and flank them?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And that came from General, Oates, you said?
No, that came from, I source for that was for Law.
Okay.
Brigade commander.
Sorry. Okay.
But but if you read Oates's book along with Law's article, you can put together the picture pretty clearly about what happened.
All right. So now take us from there.
So the Law's Vincent's brigade ends up on Little Round Top, and Vincent rode ahead first with his flag bearer Oliver Norton. And Norton wrote about a lot of this, so you get pretty firsthand accounts on it. And in fact, Norton was up there with the flag, and the Confederates saw the flag up there and started firing at it. And so he got Norton to put the flag down. And the first position he picked was 44th New York. He looked at where the Devil's Den was and what he had in front of him, and he was making sure he covered the flank from that. So he did 44th New York. And I like the story, and you can find stories about how the 20th Maine ended up on the left flank, and there are some very articulate, well-researched people who are going to argue with me. But I like the story of the 20th Maine being the 2nd Regiment up, and it fits with some stories with the 44th New York and 83rd Pennsylvania, so that's what I went with. So Vincent took care of his right flank first, then he positioned Chamberlain on his left flank. Then he used the other regiments to fill. He's going to use the other regiments to fill in the middle.
Okay.
He told Chamberlain to hold at all cost. The left flank of the Union Army, hold at all cost. So Chamberlain put men in a line, and the area now is really hard to tell what it looked like, because there was a gully between the 83rd Pennsylvania and the 20th Maine, and that gully is now a road. So it's hard to tell exactly how they were setting up. But the 83rd Pennsylvania and 20th Maine covered that gully. There weren't any troops in right there between them, but they had it covered with field of fire, and Chamberlain had 2 ranks.
And he says, "How are you, Andrew?" And he says,
"Right,
I'm good, sir. How are you?" He says, a bit worn. And he says, "I'll tell you this, sir, the boys are putting up one hell of a fight." And he said, "They are indeed." I think that's when he told them they was going to spread out the ranks because they'd been hit several times. Anyway, but somehow sidestep.
Right. So what happened was the 47th Alabama came down the hill first, and they came in on the front line of the 20th Maine. Okay. And one of the officers came to Chamberlain and said, "Sir, I see troops out on our flank, and they're flanking us." Chamberlain stood up on a rock and looked, and he could see the Confederate flag moving to his left. And they were going to come in on the flank. So he took his 2 ranks and put them down to 1 and used a big boulder as a position to turn and develop the left flank.
Okay.
And then Ellis Spear was in charge of the left flank, and Captain Clark was in charge of the right, and Chamberlain kind of stayed into the center. And you mentioned Andrew, the color bearer.
Yeah, that's it.
In the book and in the movie, the 20th Maine merged with the 2nd Maine on the day of the battle. Yeah, that happened a month before the battle.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Andrew was a sergeant in the 2nd Maine. So Chamberlain was smart. He knew he needed to merge these 2 regiments into one to be an effective fighting force.
And so the color
bearer came from the 2nd Maine.
And that was the guy a lot of people don't realize how important or vital or what a job that was to be the color bearer of the regiment. How many times did the 20th Maine get hit that day, and how many units?
Yeah, you're not going. So there was the 47th Alabama And then the 15th Alabama did most of the fighting. 47th Alabama, after one charge, backed off and just fired from the woods.
Okay.
The 15th Alabama made several charges. You know, it's one of those things nobody was really counting. So I don't know for how many. I know that they got up to the left flank and they pushed the left flank back. They pushed them so far back that Oates thought he had overrun them. And he was in the rear of the 83rd Pennsylvania. But they didn't get overrun. They fell back, and then they pushed the 15th Alabama back. Chamberlain wrote that the flag got up so close to them that one of his men reached for the Confederate flag, and a soldier next to him used a bayonet and shoved it right into his head.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. In fact, Oates's brother was killed, mortally wounded, right up there within the lines of the 20th Maine. And in fact, there's Gettysburg, the battle. Then there's the battle with the monuments. So right. Oates wanted to put a monument to the 15th Alabama where his furthest point was for the attack. And he drew a map. He went to Gettysburg, picked out some rocks, drew a map. The map is in the library at the park. And then he wrote letters saying he wanted to put it there. So they sent the information to Chamberlain. And unfortunately for Oates, he wrote, I had overrun the 20th Maine and I was in the rear of the 83rd Pennsylvania. Well, as soon as he said that monument wasn't going to go up there. Chamberlain said no. And Oates wrote Chamberlain and said, if we can meet on the hill, I'm sure we could work this out. But I couldn't find where Chamberlain responded to him.
When the bayonet charge, how accurate is that description or portrayed in the movie?
Totally inaccurate. So let's go back to Buster a second, because
Buster
was a fictional character.
Buster Kilrain, I love Buster.
Yeah, Buster wasn't real, but George Buck was. And George Buck was a sergeant, and he was on sick call, and a quartermaster came in and told him he had to go chop wood. And George said, I'm on sick call. And they ended up getting in a fight, and George punched him out.
Okay, so in Buster Kilrain, he punched out a captain.
Well, yeah. And now George is a private. So George, though, everyone treated George like he was a sergeant. So in one of the last charges up, George went down to help. Andrew was standing there with the flag by himself. So Chamberlain sending troops down to the center because the center was in disarray. And George was one of the guys, and George was shot down. And as George was dying, Chamberlain promoted him back to sergeant.
Man, see, we never got told that that he was based off a real character. I never knew that.
Yeah, and and that's one of those things that I write fiction, but I work really hard to write fiction that's based on accurate information.
Yeah, I just can't believe that they've never told us that. Because it's just always okay as a fictional character. I didn't know it was a fictional character based on a real person.
And I don't know why Michael Schraw did that. I'm sure he had the story because his story lines up, and he just made him fictional. Yeah, I guess because he could use the Irish accent and all that, and make the character development a little bit better for him, I guess. So
yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, but I wish I'd have done. I mean, that makes it a whole. Because for years when I was a kid, I first seen it, I thought he was real, and then I found out he's fake, and now I found out he's real again. So that makes a whole different take on it.
The center of the line was now in command of Lieutenant Melcher. The captain had been shot down, and he came to Chamberlain and goes, "Sir, I've got men, down the hill. I need to go get them." And Chamberlain had already decided to do a charge. He was running out of ammunition. He was told to hold at all costs, so he decided he's going to wheel the regiment and do a charge. So he made the orders to the right flank to get ready to charge. He was going to the center. Melcher came up to him. Chamberlain said, "We're going to take the whole regiment with you." Melcher went back to the center, and he had the flag, and they went. They went and first, and the left flank had no orders. So there goes the flag. And the left flank has no orders. Now the regiment split in two. And fortunately, Ellis Spear, watching the flag, did what he was supposed to do, and he charged. He didn't wheel because he had no orders to wheel. He just went straight. And so
Okay.
the left goes straight, the center goes straight, and then Chamberlain wheels the right flank because the left was enough that he wheels the right flank. So when Chamberlain talked at the presentation of the monuments, after he had an article he wrote called Blood and Guts of Gettysburg, and he talked about the wheel. Well, when he talked about the wheel, Ellis Spear got pissed because he had no orders. There was no orders to wheel. He didn't wheel. So at the monuments, Chamberlain said, well, there was no hesitation, but the orders were imperfectly given.
Oh, God. I don't think I've ever. The orders were imperfectly given.
Imperfectly given. Yeah. He screwed up, but it all worked out.
That brings me to another question about halfway about Chamberlain. There was so much more that went on the second day at Gettysburg that never gets talked about. And I'm not taking anything away from Chamberlain, but because he performed great. But how did he foresee how to market himself? I guess is the best word, because it's a name that.
So you got to keep in mind that at the time of Gettysburg, Chamberlain won high praise from General Sykes, the Corps commander, not for the charge. He got high praise for taking Big Round Top.
Okay.
And I have a letter he wrote on 4th of July. Chamberlain wrote to his wife about how Sykes sought him out and thanked him for what he did in taking Big Round Top. So while today the charge is known real well, and it gets a lot of attention and marketing after Schraw's book, Chamberlain wasn't as known as much. Jim Rice was in charge of the 44th in New York, and he ended up in charge of the brigade when Vincent was shot down. And he thanked him for the charge. It did clear things out, but it wasn't that big a deal at the time. Chamberlain wrote a story about it. And then Chamberlain being famous for other things, his charge at Petersburg where he was shot down, and then other actions he did at Five Forks. And then Grant recognized him to accept the surrender of the infantry. Do
you believe that story's true with about him and Gordon saluting each other?
He wrote that. Chamberlain wrote a book called Passing of the Armies. He wrote that.
I've read that, but I can't find anybody, and I'm not saying it didn't happen or something along those lines, but I can't find anybody to really back that up. So I've just wondered what your opinion was, if it actually happened or kind of embellished.
All the things I've read about Chamberlain, other than overplaying the wheel of the regiment, Chamberlain writes pretty accurate information. I find him to be pretty credible. The funny thing is that the 20th Maine I love the story about Chamberlain. 20th Maine got held out at Chancellorsville. They had gotten smallpox vaccinations, and they were worried that they were going to come down with it, so they're held out guarding railroad and telegraph lines. Fighting started. Chamberlain couldn't help himself, and he had this big white horse called Prince. And Prince was such a pretty horse that when Lincoln did a review of the 5th Corps, he stopped in front of Chamberlain to admire his horse. So Chamberlain rode Prince ahead at Chancellorsville. Now, at Shepherdtown, before Antietam, the 20th Maine was involved in a small conflict. He had borrowed somebody else's horse, not to put Prince in danger. But Chancellorsville, they weren't going into combat, so he rode his horse up there. Confederate artillery saw him on that white horse and fired at him, and the horse was killed, and Chamberlain was knocked down and wounded. It was a minor wound, but that's why at Gettysburg he didn't have his big white horse, because he had lost it at Chambers.
I didn't know that.
Chancellorsville. That's where he lost it.
That's at the beginning of the movie. Now it got me thinking about when he said he was going to walk with the men. So he was walking because he didn't have a horse.
No, he had a horse. He just walked on it. And, his brothers gave him hell about getting back up on the horse. Vincent came and told him he needed to get back up on his horse because he had suffered heat stroke a few weeks before, and they were worried about him being stupid. So.
And let me tell you, if I don't know how many people that there's ever went down with the heat. When I was in basic training, I was in the rifle range, and I don't know if it was, I guess it was probably just heat exhaustion, but I went down with the heat. and you never get over that totally.
Yeah.
You always, I mean, for the rest of your life, if it gets to you, all overheat now. So I can only imagine what it was like for him suffering a heat stroke and still marching out there in that kind of heat with those kind of uniforms on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to take you off track there.
Oh, it's okay.
All right. So your book, Courage on a Little Runtime, it basically focuses on the 15th Alabama
And 20th Maine.
and the 20th Maine. Okay.
But at the same time, there was so many misinformations from PBS series The Civil War and the book Gettysburg about how they ended up there. So I do track down, from Lee to Meade about how they all ended up there. Some little things that are not well known. For example, Longstreet did this big counter march so he wouldn't be discovered. Well, he got on Fairfield Road and he's heading towards the north part of towards the town of Gettysburg, towards Cemetery Hill, basically, and the single station on Little Round Top saw him. Saw 15,000 men were heading towards the northwest, and then they turned. Single station didn't see the turn, so Meade spent a lot of time thinking about his northern part of his line because he thought that's where the attack was coming from. And he didn't realize till very late that they were coming in on the left. So Longstreet's little counter march helped disguise what was happening.
I'm glad you brought that up. What is your opinion on that counter march? I mean, because I've heard people argue back and forth, waste of time. The purpose, did it, I don't know, to undermine, I don't know if I want to use that word, but he shouldn't have done it. He should have went straight.
Well, the funny thing is the artillery went ahead of him. And there was this hill. I think the road is Blackstone. What's there's a tavern right there where the road is. I just did a thing of photos on it, as I get
I know what you're talking about.
Tip of the tongue phenomenon. I keep forgetting names and it'll come to me a little bit. So they had this counter march on this road and went over top of a hill and clearly visible at Little Round Top. So Alexander took the artillery around the base of the hill, around the western side of the hill, so they wouldn't be seen. I think Longstreet was so pissed about his orders that he didn't see where the artillery went. He could have if he paid attention, and he just decided to do the counter march. I think it was just because he was irritated. He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to take his men over there and attack. And he just was being what Longstreet could be at times, pretty.
Okay, so because you're going to hear that fight on July 2nd coming up. People arguing, Longstreet was slow, Longstreet wasn't. So you think Longstreet was slow that day?
Oh yeah, he was a lot slower than what, and it really had effect later in the day. Because the attack on Culp's Hill ended up being after dark. It was pretty much twilight when Cemetery Hill happened, and that definitely hurt the Confederate attack later in the afternoon.
One of our the best I've heard on Gettysburg, member of Killer Angels, the late Michael Pitts.
Oh,
he used to say, and he could rattle off everything. And I don't know if you know numbers on this, but I've heard people argue back and forth. Michael says he used to say that Longstreet got his orders at 9, and I've never really, some people said 9, 10, 11, whatever. He says that if Longstreet had went straight into the fight when ordered, the Confederates they were numerically even, or Confederates had a slightly numerical advantage. When they finally went into the fight, they were outnumbered by 20,000 men. You have an opinion on that?
I don't know. Well, 20,000 would have been the 6th Corps. And the 6th Corps really wasn't in a position to do a whole lot on the second day. They filled in some gaps. They did help with beating back Crawford, beating back the attack. Anderson's brigade, there's like 6 brigades from Confederate brigades they pushed back on the north side of Little Round Top. But by that time, all those brigades had gone through a lot of fighting. So, it wasn't this huge a deal. But yeah, he's right. The 6th Corps got there, and that did give Meade additional reinforcements to spread around the regiment. He didn't use them as a full, around the army, he didn't use them as a full corps on the second day. But yeah, he's right. The Sixth Corps got there, and if he would have went earlier, the Sixth Corps wouldn't have been there, and Meade would have been. It would have been a different battle because Meade didn't have them, so he would have been definitely undermanned.
So do you think if he went in earlier, the Confederates could have won the second day?
You know, I'm not going to get into what if things on that. You can do what ifs all day.
I leave that up to the viewer's imagination then.
Yeah.
So you seems like you put a lot of research and time in. How long did it take you to write this book?
It took me 5 years to do the research. It took me about 3 years to write it. Then it took me 15 years to get it published because the
15 years.
Yeah, the first draft sucked. You know, I'd never written anything before. I didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to do the research. I wanted to find somebody to partner with me and help me write the book. Couldn't find anybody interested in doing it. So I'd write myself. And I have dysgraphia. It's a mild version of it. It's a writing disorder. So
what is it again? What did you say? Dysgraphia?
Dysgraphia. It is the writing version of dyslexia. And so I have, you know, I learned, now I know why in first grade I couldn't spell the. I knew how to spell the, T-H-E. But when I wrote it down, it came out H-T-E. And, you know, it's one of those things that you remember because it's such a, you know, how did I do that? And then I've learned that, you know, over time that, you know, I leave out words. I use the wrong, and then and spelling, and I do not get along.
So maybe you're on the same page.
Yeah, I can't sound out words. And when you can't sound out words properly, it makes writing, spelling, the vocabulary hard.
That's one of my pet peeves. I don't know if you guys know, a few weeks ago, I told somebody this. We had a member that had put a post out there. So it was a really good question. And somebody responded back that something about penmanship or something. And the guy said, you know, I'm trying as hard as I can. It took me a lot to get that out. And that's those things really set me off because that's when I responded, you know, I didn't hire you to be the editor. And, you know, the next comment you make towards somebody regarding their grammar will be your last comment.
Yeah.
And try not to admin because I can't, because some people have dyslexia or, you know, some problem with that. And it does not have anything to do with their intelligence. You know, I know engineers right now that, that are dyslexic. So that's just, sorry, I didn't mean to get you off there, but that's just one of my pet peeves is when somebody goes after somebody, you know, because of their grammar.
In the last year, I discovered Grammarly. And so I'm writing on Facebook and other things I'm writing. My new book I'm writing and helping Grammarly to help me. And that helps a lot to make up for my deficiencies with it. And I still make mistakes. I mean, you know, when you have a disorder and you just work to overcome it and you keep working and working and working. And then I hired somebody to edit it. And the editors of the first book weren't very good. So I had to hire somebody else. And so anyway, 15 years got published.
And how many copies did you publish on that first one?
First one was 2,500 and it sold out.
Wow, 2,500 sold out.
And the publisher we didn't do any more because publisher went out of business. So I thought, well, okay, I'll write the next book and I'll have 2 books. And I wrote Courage on Cemetery Ridge. Time I got it done, you know, it took me another 15 years to get that one finished.
Now, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Not quite that long. Sorry. Go ahead.
Is this about the second day as well, or is this the third day or first day?
The big criticism I had from some people on Courage and Little Round Top, it was one day. And the fighting was at the end because, you know, I had the story I wanted to tell. They only fought one time, both regiments. There was no other fighting. So for Courage on Cemetery Ridge, I wanted all 3 days. So when I was doing the research from Courage on Little Round Top, I found a write-up by Jacob Turney. He was captain of Company A, 1st Tennessee. And he did a thing right up in the Confederate Veteran magazine. And he was involved in the morning attack on the first day that got defeated and pushed back. He was involved in the afternoon attack as providing cover for the right flank of the attack. You know, and he got too far out front. And if you don't mind, I want to read just a little bit of what Turney wrote.
Go ahead.
Because it's kind of interesting. Archer's brigade was then withdrawn to the right of Lee's army. There we were deployed as a body of observation. My company was ordered as far in advance it was safe to go. I ventured near Emmitsburg Road, where I saw the enemy moving his transportation to the rear. In my effort to report to my commander, I encountered General Lee, who asked what I found in the front. When I reported, he remarked to his staff, "I'm afraid they will get away." So, I mean, I got him involved in the first attack. I got him involved in the second. He talked to General Lee. And then he was in the second day they arrested. Third day he was in Pickett's charge. So I knew before I started the book who I was going to write about when it came to the Confederates. I had him picked.
Wow.
I got 3 days of fighting. So then I went to the library in Gettysburg and I talked to John Heiser, who was the librarian at the time. He's retired now. And I asked John, I got a great Confederate. Who do I write for with the Union? And he'd help me with Courage on the Little Round Top and help me with the research. And he goes, well, you might think about Stephen Brown. And I had no idea who Stephen Brown was. And do you know who Stephen Brown is?
No, I do not.
Okay. He's first lieutenant in Company K of 13th Vermont. They were a 9-month regiment. They fought in one battle 2 weeks before they got out. It was Gettysburg. So they were spent almost all their time guarding railroad lines and telegraph lines. They did see Stewart. Stewart was making an advance where they were, and Stewart saw all these men. They were 1,000 men strong in the brigade. They were the 2nd Vermont Brigade. Stewart thought but second about it and turned around and left. That was the only action they saw. So 2 days after the 1st Corps went by them heading north, they got assigned to the 1st Corps of the Union Army. Now they're part of the Army of Potomac, and they had to catch up. So they were near Fredericksburg, and they stopped to rest. And, these guys, they had done no marching. They were from Vermont. And the heat, they was really driving them, having a lot of trouble. They had men dropping out of formation right and left during the march.
Oh, bad.
And Brown looked over his men in the company, and he saw a lot of them were out of water. And it looked like they were going to faint. And he went to his captain, George Blakey, and said, we need to get water. And there was a well nearby. And it shone, the sun was just right. That well was painted white, and it just shone like a beacon. And Blakey said, well, they've already asked the general. And he said, no, we're not breaking formation. We're going to stay here in formation. And Stephen told him, give me your canteen. And Stephen gathered up another soldier, Oliver Plazzi, sorry. And him and Oliver gathered up all the canteens that were empty. Oliver carried the majority of them because he was a big guy. And they went walking to the well. And the cavalry sergeant was guarding the well on horseback. And the sergeant, got in front of him and said, sir, you can't get water here. And Brown told him, I love you like a brother. I'm going to get water. You can stay and you can go and report me. I'm Stephen Brown, 13th Vermont, or you can stay and die. And Brown is a very religious guy, and everything I've read about him, and I've got some of the things that he wrote, very religious. And the cavalry sergeant, I don't think he knew what to do. So he just went and reported him. Brown got the water with Oliver, and they got it back to the company, and he was placed under arrest, and they took his sword away. So, but they didn't take him out of line, didn't take him out of his job. He was still there, and he was under arrest. And his tent mate, he borrowed his hatchet, and Brown went into battle at Gettysburg with a camp hatchet.
Oh my, nice story.
So after the war, they were going to do a 13th Vermont monument, and the company remembered the story. And so Stephen Brown is on the monument for the 13th Vermont at Gettysburg. And another thing that in the story that kind of admired people was they ended up fighting against Kemper's men, 13th Vermont. Yeah. Was in a forward position, and they attacked Kemper on the flank, and they followed Kemper's brigade. And at the end of the fighting, the Confederates were surrendering, and this captain was going to surrender. And Brown said, I want your sword. And the captain said, no, I'm not giving it to you. It's a junior officer. And Brown held up the hatchet. And the Confederate officer decided the guy was nuts and gave him the sword. So on the monument, Brown is holding the sword he captured, and at his right foot, hanging over the statue, is the hatchet. The regiment wanted him holding the statue, but the Gettysburg Commission decided that was not dignified and wouldn't do it.
God, that's a great story. Yeah, I'm glad that you've told this story because that's one of the things that I did a while back for Wednesdays is Warrior Wednesday or whatever. We all hear stories about Lee and Grant and Sherman and Jackson, and so you never hear these stories about these guys right here.
Oh yeah,
and then there's so much more, in that it makes those other guys, and we never get told stuff like this.
So I got first day fighting. I got third day fighting. Turney was with the 1st Tennessee. They made it to the wall. He went over the wall with Armstead when Armstead put his hat on his sword.
Yeah.
And that's where he was captured. Him and his brother Albert were captured there. And by the time he got to the wall, Turney was in charge of Archer's brigade because Fry, who took over command, he was injured. And 1st Tennessee Commander Newton George was injured, and Fry saw Turney and put Turney in charge because he was the only officer he saw because the troops were just falling right and left.
Hey, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Who went over? Which units went over the wall with Armistead again?
So it was whoever happened to be at the wall.
Okay. Whoever made it.
Yeah, it was just so.
All right, that's fair enough.
So I got second day, no fighting, but the 13th Vermont, they got to Gettysburg in the evening first day, and the second day they were on reserve right near Meade's headquarters on Taneytown Road. And they're standing there, and some artillery rounds hit up on Cemetery Hill, and here comes a whole mess of men, Union troops, running down the hill. And the commander of the 13th Vermont rode his horse over there and tried to stop him, get him hold up, and he yelled at him, "Look at all these green troops. They're not running. Why are you running?" And so they needed to have some support for the artillery up on East Cemetery Hill. So they split 15th Alabama in half. Half of them went up on up on Cemetery Hill to guard artillery. The other part was in reserve on Cemetery Ridge. Wow. And when Wright's brigade came, that section went over the ridge and helped beat back Wright's brigade. Brown was with the group that went up on Cemetery Hill. And after I went to, with Brown, I did as much research as I did with, Wicker. But the advantage was the internet was more advanced when I was writing the second book, so it took less time. Even though it got as much work, I didn't have to know as much traveling. But I went to Swanton, Vermont, with his hometown. And I went into I was looking for property records and couldn't find what I was looking for. The person I needed to talk to wasn't there that day. I did find his grave in the cemetery right next to the courthouse. And then I went over to the library. The library is a great place to find things. And I walked in and said, "Do you have any information on Stephen Brown?" And they go, "We don't, but the Historical Society is in the basement. And they're not here today, but we can go get somebody for you." So they did. They opened up the Historical Society just for me. And I got to read Stephen Brown's scrapbook. So in it, he wrote something that, to me, it was amazing. I learned something I never knew before. And so I'm going to read it. If you don't mind, I'm going to read it because I think it's interesting.
Okay, go ahead, right ahead.
In the first year of Cleveland's administration, I was introduced to John J. Abercrombie Jr. Point of information, John J. Abercrombie was a brigadier general in the Union Army, and this was his son. And he was a lieutenant in the 143rd Infantry, New York Infantry. I met him in the Chicago Pension Office. He had just been appointed assistant pension agent. He spoke of, and I can't, the author who wrote, the painter who painted the Psychorama, his painting. Great painting of the Battle of Gettysburg on exhibit there. It was exhibited there for the World's Fair. He invited my criticism. I could offer none, and I asked his. He said that in the picture, the artillery men were on the wrong side of their guns. Have you ever heard that before?
No, I've never heard that before. I mean, attention to detail, I guess.
Yeah. So Brown goes, I told him I never knew which side they belonged, inquired if he was in artillery. He said yes. At Gettysburg, he said yes. We're stationed on Cemetery Hill. On what day? The second day. Weren't the Third Corps left in front of you, and quite unceremoniously did they not retreat? And Abercrombie goes, they did, but a company of you Vermonters took their place and stayed until they were relieved by a brigade. You got short of ammunition there, did you not? We did, but some of you Vermonters brought up a supply, and I was plumb sorry they did, for I thought we had already suffered enough to be relieved. Brown, you blew up a rebel field hospital, all the smithereens with the first shell they gave you, did you not? We did, but it was the only thing we could do under the circumstances. They had just blown up two of ours, and we were compelled to keep them within bounds. Extending my right hand, I said, shake. You told me that when I handed you the shell.
Wow.
So what happened was, Brown was one of these guys who he liked to help people. He was very religious. He lived his religion. They got up on Taneytown Road is where first they were stationed in the cemetery itself. And one of the guys and they had them, everybody lay down. And one of the guys spread eagle. Well, I mean, like a snow angel, his arms out and his legs out. And Brown goes, what are you doing? He goes, well, if I get hit by a shell, I'm going to make sure that I don't only lose one limb. Everybody did that. They were 9-month regiment. They had never seen any comment, no fire. So everybody spread eagle. And Brown lay down. And he did the same thing. Well, then they moved him up along the stone wall on Taneytown Road. And where they were, they could see the cemetery, upper part of Cemetery Ridge, all the way down to Little Round Top and Big Round Top. And they could follow the attack from Longstreet's attack by the smoke that they could see rising. So they watched it. And they watched their men go over the ridge and beat back Wright's brigade. And Brown looked around, saw this artillery guns, and not firing. And I don't know how many guns there were, but he talks, he's not real clear, but it sounded like just one gun. So Brown went over and asked why they stopped firing. He goes, well, we don't have enough men to get ammunition. Brown went back to Blakey and goes, I want good a detail. And he goes, well, only take volunteers. And he got volunteers, and they started carrying up shells. And that's the shell they gave to Abercrombie. I knew that I'd read that Confederates had hit some aid stations on Cemetery Hill. I'd read that already. I had never read anywhere that artillery had purposely singled out and fired at aid stations.
I've never heard that either. That's
And you get things going on in stories in firsthand accounts when they start exaggerating, and like Turney wrote when he got to the wall, they gathered 200 men and he jumped over the wall and fired into the rear of the infantry, the Union Army, and they broke it up so that the 26th North Carolina could continue their attack. And they got replies saying, no, that didn't happen. And Wiley Wood was the color bearer of the 1st Tennessee, and he was up there. And he said, yeah, he went across the wall with a few people, and they fired, and they came right back. So, Turney exaggerated how much his effect was. But that's what he did. He did go over the wall. He just didn't really accomplish a whole lot. But this was Brown. I mean, there's no bragging about anything. It's just stated matter of fact. And it wasn't like fog of war. I mean, he remembered it clearly. Abercrombie remembered the same thing clearly. And the story is in the history of 13th Vermont. This story is in there. And so it was just, it's when you find something you've never read before in any books anywhere, it's just amazing. And I'm sure there's historical sites all across the country written where they have stories from people that's never been discovered because nobody ever looked.
Oh yeah, I bet you're 100% right on it. That you could probably write. I mean, you could write a book from so many different people's perspective. Because I've run across so many people that I've never heard anything about, and they've got this long biography there. It's like, wow, man, that's you never get told this stuff. You never get told these stories.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's no telling how many that are out there that people we still never heard of.
Yeah. One of Stephen Brown's good friends, after he captured the sword, they were starting to get back in the line where they had originally started. And 13th Vermont was moving back in line. And Wilcox artillery opened up on them.
Yeah.
And Corporal Welch was hit by an artillery shell. And right next to Brown, they were good friends. Brown got down next to him to help him and see if he could help him. And another shell exploded over Brown and knocked him unconscious. He wasn't hurt, but he was knocked silly. And Welch was buried on Cemetery Ridge. And after the battle, 2 weeks later, 13th Vermont was out of service. A lot of them joined the 17th Vermont, including Stephen Brown. But at the time, they were civilians. So George Blakey went home back to Gettysburg, dug up his body, and took it back to Swanton, Vermont. And him and Stephen Brown are buried together in the cemetery, town cemetery.
How long did Brown live?
He lived, I don't know exactly when he died. He lived into old age. So he was in the 17th Vermont. He was captain of Company A, and he was injured at the Wilderness, and he lost his arm. So he was in two battles, Gettysburg and the Wilderness.
God, talk about two slugfest.
Yeah.
What the Confederate officer you mentioned a while ago, what was his name again?
Jacob Turney.
And he was in. You said him and his brother was
captured. So there were two. He had two brothers with him at Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. He had two other brothers that were killed earlier in the war. One was killed at Gaines Mill, and another one was killed during the 7 days battle. One of the 7 days battle. So he had two brothers that were killed, and then his brother James escaped. He got back in the lines, and him and his brother Albert were captured. And James helped Albert escape from West Virginia, and they ended up staying with some Southern sympathizers until the end of the war. So they were both out of the war after that. You talk about being able to judge a regiment by how clean their flag was, and 13th Vermont Green Regiment. Perfect flag, no colors on it. Well, the Confederate battle flag for the 1st Tennessee was a new flag. They had lost their flag at Gaines Mill, and they got a new one right before Gettysburg, and they lost it at Gettysburg. And that's
God.
Tennessee Historical Society has it, and it's in mint condition.
Before I forget this question, you're going to see it on day 1 too. The fight, the never-ending fight. Take that hill if practical. Which hill, in your opinion, was Lee talking about, and could General Ewell have taken that hill?
So he's talking about Cemetery Hill because it was the hill with the tall tree. So and that stood out. And
I've heard people say Colts Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and I can never. I'll ask 4 people, I'll get 4 different answers.
Yeah, he went up to the cupola. And he was looking straight across and at that tall hill. And so it was Cemetery Hill. There's no debate about that.
Cemetery Hill, okay.
Yeah. Now, Howard had left a division behind to start building breastworks on Cemetery Hill in artillery position. And then as everybody came running back, that was the rallying point for Cemetery Hill. So the Union Army had a lot of troops right there. They already had some dug-in artillery, and I'm sure that gave Ewell some second thoughts about attacking the hill.
I mean, what Michael told me, and like I said, I've no reason to doubt him because he seemed accurate on everything else he told me. He said that what Johnson's division didn't catch up with Ewell until after dark. I think he said Ewell had about 17,000 men, and he was staring down the barrel of 10,000 men and 30 cannon on that hill.
Yeah.
And he said it would have been a slaughter, and the only way he could have taken it was unless Hill supported.
Yeah. Well, I like getting into the fight about Little Round Top and Chamberlain. The charge was overblown, and everything. But when he extended his line, he stopped a 15th Alabama at the time, other than lack of water, was a pretty fresh regiment, and they were outnumbered, and he stopped them. And I get a lot of criticism about this, but if 15th Alabama would have flanked 20th Maine and got behind them, they would have got behind the 83rd Pennsylvania and the 44th New York and the 16th Michigan, and while they were being pressed in the front. And it's very possible that if he hadn't extended his line, they could have lost for a time Little Round Top. Now, what would have happened after that? That's up in the air. But if you got Confederate flags up on Little Round Top, and there are other troops coming, like Anderson's brigade and Benning's brigade, they could have used that as a rallying point instead of going farther up the north side of the hill. And they might have been able to hold on late into the day and maybe overnight that southern section of Little Round Top. Now, what they could have done with it after that, I don't know. But it would have given Meade a lot of pause to know that there were troops on his flank like that.
Well, yeah, he had that kind of, his flanks in the air. That's kind of.
They would have had Big Round Top. They would have had Devil's Den. They would have had Little Round Top. And what Meade would have done with that, I don't know. And when I start that, they'll start talking about, well, the 6th Corps was right there. Well, the 6th Corps was wasted. They had taken part a little bit. And attacking from that position, that's a narrow area coming up the hill, they might have been able to hold it.
Yeah, you've made a really good point there, because I've heard people make that argument too, and I never thought about 6th Corps being used up and how narrow of a pathway that was to attack. And with them spent and bottled up like that, they might have been able to hold that.
Yeah, and they wouldn't. The next morning, they probably could have knocked them off, if they wanted to. But having it overnight, when Meade had his Council of War, that makes it a discussion, and that could have changed what Meade did on the third day.
Well, that does. That changes that is a game changer right there, because you've got your whole flanks. You've been flanked with that kind of body of troops there. You can't hold that position.
Yeah, and the Confederates had the right flank. They got up on Culp's Hill. They didn't have that many people, so they had the right. Now they have the left. It would make the way they organize troops a lot different. And now if Lee's got Little Round Top, what kind of attack is he going to do? Is he going to do the center, or now is he going to come in on the flank?
He's going to bring 15,000 men right now.
Yeah, and you don't know. And I'm not going to play what ifs, other than it would have made the third day different. How it would have been different, I have no idea. But Chamberlain extended his line in half. They held, and the 15th Alabama, when they still could have done something, were held back. That's
an very interesting perspective there. I've never heard that one about that sidestep right there, and that brings in a whole new what if for about that third day.
There are people who study Little Round Top as much as I do, who think I'm all wet, and there's Tom Eishman wrote a book, Standing Firm, Boys and Men, an excellent book. I like Tom. I met him on Little Round Top, and he's got the idea that 16th Michigan was to the left of 20th Maine, and then they were moved to the right because the ground didn't look satisfying, so they moved them. Now, the story I like better, and it's documented, is 16th Michigan came up, and they were going to go between the 83rd Pennsylvania and the 44th New York. And Jim Rice, the 44th New York, went to Vincent and said, look, we always fight together. 83rd Pennsylvania, 44th New York, we fight together. We want to fight together here. Then Vincent put them on the right flank instead. So that's in the 83rd Pennsylvania history. And it's in a report I read from Jim Rice. People say, well, it didn't happen because 16th Michigan said this. Well, and it's areas hard to see there. You're coming up over a hill, what you're looking at. Does 16th Michigan think they were on the left flank and they weren't? I have no idea. But, they did get moved to the right flank. And then the other controversy I like is there's a wonderful monument to where Vincent was shot down on Little Round Top. And it's just above where the 83rd Pennsylvania was. But if you come up to the 44th New York, there's a rock right before it on the north side of 44th New York. And on there it says, Strong Vincent was shot down here. And that was carved by a veteran who was at the battle. So where was Strong Vincent shot? Yeah, we have no idea.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I tell people I write fiction, And I write fiction because my dysgraphia, footnoting, bibliographies, keeping track of things, it's hard for me to do.
Even with that right there, sorry, I didn't cut you off, but you'll have these books, and then I'll say something that goes with groundbreaking new research material. Where did you come up with this 165 years later? I see that these people do that. So I guess what the point I'm making is when the historical fiction that you're writing is just as accurate to me when you're using those type of sources as opposed to somebody that's coming out.
Yeah, I got dialogue, I got interpersonal.
Did I say that right, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I've got dialogue, I have interpersonal reactions, but when it comes to the history, it's hard for people to disprove me because I work real hard to try to be accurate.
Right. Yeah.
So I had a story in the second book. You've heard the story about Heath wanting to go into Gettysburg to get shoes.
Oh yeah.
Well, so I have some context for that. Now, I found the book in the library at Gettysburg. Great story. And I forgot to copy the title page. I copied the page where the story is, and I have that, but I forgot to copy the title page. So I can't tell you what book it is, but it says, on the last day of June, 1863, a Tennessee brigade under the command of General James Archer was bivouacked around Cashtown, Pennsylvania. That's accurate. The stores in Cashtown had no shoes, but some of the officers and men of the 7th Tennessee had been informed by a friendly local that if they would go across a certain street to a certain house and look in the cellar, they would find all they required. The advice was promptly followed, and upon opening the cellar, they found it was full of merchandise of all kinds. A wagon was sent for, and indeed, all the men's shoes which they needed for the 7th Tennessee was there. Really? Yes.
So there was some truth to that.
So if Heath heard that story, and there's other stories of farmers hiding their livestock down in the cellars. In New Guilford.
There is some truth to that story.
Yeah. So now that story is probably accurate. Did he hear that story and then make up the excuse with Lee that I was going into Gettysburg to get shoes? Because Pettigrew told him that Pettigrew had done reconnaissance up towards McPherson's Ridge on the day before, on the 30th. And he said he came back and said he saw Union cavalry, and nobody believed him. He thought it was just state militia. And I'm sure that Heath just pushed up there because he thought he was dealing with just state militia and not Union cavalry, and thought it'd be a quick little fight. And he got into something over his head. So when Lee came up to him, he said, well, I was going into Gettysburg to look for shoes. So I think he said the excuse, but he might have heard that story and it clicked in his mind, well, this might get me out of this. So
you think that scene in Gettysburg is pretty accurate, where he comes up and the situation is very confused, and Lee goes, what's happening? He goes, I went in, it's very strange, sir. And, I thought it was just militia, and it turned out to be dismounted cavalry.
Yeah, found Union cavalry. And, I start my book out with Jacob Turney and Newton George, commander of the 1st Tennessee, talking about what they are up against. Was it just state militia or Union cavalry? And it didn't sound like state militia to them because the rifles they were using. You can tell the difference between a carbine and a muzzle loader. And the way they were acting, the way they were behaving. And, Archer was delaying. He wasn't aggressive in the advance. And that gave First Corps time to get where they were supposed to be. And
again, as much as I love Lee, I don't blame that on Harry Heath. His orders that he gave him was caution against bringing on a general engagement.
Yeah,
and like you said, he really didn't know what he was up against.
And
and I could see how things unfolded.
Yeah, in the first book, I did a lot about, Lee, and a little bit about me and Lee. The second book I did, it's just point of view from Jacob Turney and Stephen Brown and the people right around them, what they saw. But in the first book I did about Lee and his illness, because, everybody's speculating what was wrong with Lee, and everybody's talking about he had a mild heart attack. I don't know how you prove that with the medical things at the time, but I read from one of Lee's aides that he had gotten into the cherries in Cashtown
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, unripened cherries, and he had diarrhea, old soldier's disease, and you get diarrhea with the heat and his age, that how terrible that can be, and it just
Yeah,
messes with everything.
he was
And
probably
he rode his horse. He didn't ride Traveler at Gettysburg. He rode Lucy Lou, and the officer speculated that Lee liked the way the other horse rode was a calmer ride than Traveler. So he just the way he felt, it felt better riding him than it did riding Traveler.
You mentioned the heart condition. Now I've heard, obviously I don't think it was massive, but somebody said something after Chancellorsville, a major heart attack. And I said, well, if he'd had a major heart attack after Chancellorsville, he's not getting on the horse 3 weeks later and going north to Gettysburg. I said, now, could it have been a minor one? I said, yeah. Could he have had the first stages of heart disease setting in with, because at the end of his life, I've read medical reports now that talk about angina. I said, yeah, I could see that. But I said, a massive heart attack right after Chancellorsville? I said, there's no way he could have recovered in 3 weeks.
I don't know what doctor's reports they've read to that account about his illness at Gettysburg, but I read first-person account that what they thought was wrong with him. It was just old soldier's disease.
Now, these reports that I had read about, they were basing it on Lee at the end of his life, and they really weren't talking about diagnosing him as a heart attack or in 1863.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know when the heart disease set in.
Anybody that tells you they know, they're writing as much fiction as I am.
And 7 years is a long time to live with heart disease too.
Yeah.
So you got to think too. Which you touched on his age. I think he would have been about 56.
Yeah.
56. Was that right? 56.
Yeah.
So how into 56 in 1863? How would that be in years for a man today? I mean.
Yeah, it's different. But Chamberlain with his bladder problem lived into his 80s.
Yeah, I forgot he lived later. Did he become governor of his state?
Yeah, he was governor, 2 terms governors, and I think he won 3 or 4 terms. Then he was president of Bowdoin University. He wasn't real popular at Bowdoin because he brought his military attitude to the class. Some people didn't appreciate that.
Go back to that heart problem. Have you ever heard, because I've asked other people, I've heard this from somebody, I can't find anybody else to ever back it up, or else who ever heard it. Have you ever heard that during the argument with Stewart, or whatever discussion they had, that Lee suffered a light heart attack that night?
No, and
I mean, because I was like, I just, suffering a heart attack and then being up to 1 a.m. and then back up again at 4. I just don't see that happening with the man at 60 years old.
A few weeks ago, I had a massive chest pain, and it was just terrible. And I was a little worried for a little bit until I started burping. You get massive indigestion, and it presses in on your chest. And to other people, it could look like you're having a heart attack when you're not. Now, the flip side is my dad's dad died at 36 from heart disease, and he had it for several years before, and people knew it. But, and this was he died in 1919. So, but it's, he was a young guy and stuff, but, you have isolated incidences and, not having shortness of breath. I didn't hear anybody write that he had trouble staying on his horse or shortness of breath or fatigue, that he couldn't do his duty, and I just don't understand them jumping to heart attack.
Yeah, and especially let's just say he did have, for the sake of argument, had a heart attack. I mean, he stayed in command for 2 more years.
Yeah,
I just don't know if it would have been, if he would have been ravaged with, or even if heart disease began setting in then. It's a lot to command for 2 more years and not have no more incidences. Or
yeah. All of a sudden, he was sick at Gettysburg. That's all we know for
yeah,
sure. And I know at least I take confidence from the staff, and just like the piece of the thing I read about the shoes on the second book, I can't give you the quote of which staff person it is. I got it probably up in my attic in the papers from the book but I'd finished the research in 94. So, I have to go up in the attic. And right now had surgery yesterday on tendons, so I can't lift anything. So, and then, going up steps, my left knee needs to be replaced. It's a little hard going up the attic steps because I'm just old. So, but
yeah,
I read it and I'm accurate about what I wrote. So,
what do you think? Of course, nobody. This is only speculation too, because I wasn't in there. The scene in Gettysburg with Lee and Stewart. Think that's accurate, or
I have no idea. So, okay. All my focus on Lee was how did Longstreet get on the left flank? How did 15th Alabama end up on the end of the army? So I just told the story about how that happened.
Okay.
A little bit about why, Ewell didn't attack and Lee went over there and, whether he lost confidence in them or not. But when Stewart came back, I was focused in on, I had no use for Lee anymore. The 15th Alabama was over on the end.
Okay. I just wonder, because that's going to be, those 3 days there, you're going to have that's what we want to, Stewart left him blind, and you have to explain to people, well,
I know a lot about 4 regiments and what they did and 4 guys. When it comes to the rest of the battle, I can talk about it, but I'm not going to tell you things I really don't remember. I don't know.
I'm saying, I mean, that's so amazing that you focused it down to 4 regiments and 4 people that would have been lost to time if you'd not taken that time of research to put in. I wonder if those guys, they had no idea some guy 120, 30, 40 years later is going to be going and digging up papers on them or write a book.
So I want to put a plug in, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah.
Amazon has Courage on Little Round Top on sale for $9.99 or $10.99. $10.99.
Okay.
$4 off, and my royalties are not affected. So I'd hope people, if you want to, it's on print on demand, and they do a quality print. It's printed in the United States, and the book is just a real quality work they do.
And what about for the other one?
It's $14.99. It's also on Amazon, Courage on Cemetery Ridge. But for some reason, I looked at it, and my book was so cheap, and I thought, what the heck did they do? They screw up the price? And I called them and said, no, we just put it on sale. And we're absorbing the cost on the sale. So, and I've got 40 reviews on Little Round Top, and it's got 4.2 stars. A couple guys tore me up because the fighting was only on towards the end of the book. The real fighting happened, and they weren't happy with not enough fighting. Well, I got to deal with the regiments I have, And I did a little bit about how Wicker had gotten injured earlier in the war. And so I had a little bit of that. And I did Chamberlain at Fredericksburg. Funny story about Chamberlain at Fredericksburg. They were held 2 nights up on the ridge. So they got there late, and that night they stayed, and Chamberlain pulled up bodies in front of him to try to keep warm, because they left his coat behind because they didn't expect to stay. They stayed there all night under gunfire. They couldn't move. One guy near Chamberlain raised up his head, and he was immediately shot in the head. Then the next night they were told to stay to cover the retreat of the army. And Chamberlain's walking around, and and hears some digging, and he walks up, and this guy's digging a hole in the wrong direction. And Chamberlain goes, "Well, what are you doing?" He goes in a great Southern accent, "Well, I'm building a breastwork so that the Yankees can't get me." And Chamberlain changed to a Southern accent and said, "Well, let's carry on," and walked away. He got too far forward, already got where the Confederate line was. So,
how do you change from a Maine accent to a Confederate?
Chamberlain was excellent with languages. He's
that's right. That's so cool.
And, I used John Chamberlain allowed me to do dialogue with Joshua that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because, he's a civilian. He came down, Joshua invited John and his sister Sarah to come down to Fredericksburg. They figured they were going to be there for the summer, not expecting what Lee was going to do. And Sarah bugged out, but John joined the Christian Commission and came down. He had a horse. And, and he made stops on the way down, and he visited Third Corps Hospital, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but he talked to a soldier who had been first sergeant in a unit, and he had been shot and left for dead, and the Confederates captured him and got him back to health, and they paroled him, and he went back to his regiment. And his company, now he's a private again, because they had filled his spot. And he got shot down again, and he was able to avoid capture. And this next time he got shot 3 places, and he goes, I think they finally got me, Poor guy. And John's writing this, and in his diary, John wrote a diary, 10 pages, and it's in the Brunswick Historical Society up in Maine. And I used that for a lot of the dialogue and things that I could use John's adventures coming down to join his brothers. I didn't do word for word, but pretty close. And
sorry. I'm glad you mentioned that earlier today, or earlier about the Southern Historical Society, because I remember when I first started reading stuff, people would tell me, "Oh, don't read anything from the Southern Historical Society," And so I'm like, well, why not? And they're like, it's the Lost Cause, group. So then I start going to the Southern Historical Society, and I'm finding all these after action reports from officers. I'm like,
yeah.
How? Wait a second. How are you how are you discrediting everything in there because of something that that may fit in to another type of narrative? I said, here's after action reports from officers from company level all the way up to senior command. How are you discrediting everything that's in there?
So what people will do is they'll get the overall gist of the organization's tactics and not take into account just what's there. And, you read things in context. And sometimes they exaggerate, but the article I read that Law wrote was no flowery language, no talking about how great he was. It was just kind of step by step what happened. And he didn't do an official report. This is his only official report.
Yeah, I found, lots of officers' reports like that from every battle that was out. Like I said, lieutenants that had stepped in from the company commander was killed, and it went all the way up. And I was like, no, I'm not going to discredit this whole Southern Historical Society because what you think Jubal Early did on the Sunrise Order. I said that there's a lot of good reading in here.
And they focus a lot on Virginia and, the Eastern battles where the Confederate Veteran Magazine, they're based out of Tennessee. They were based out of Tennessee. So you get a lot more variety there. And that's why Turney wrote for them. He was living in Tennessee at the time when he submitted his article. So there weren't that many Tennessee regiments in the East, but there were some. So, and, you got to call it Turney's 1st Tennessee because there were Manley's 1st Tennessee in the West. And Turney's 1st Tennessee started as the 1st Confederate Regiment because they left Tennessee when Tennessee was still a Union state.
Ah, okay.
And, so Peter Turney was a second cousin to Jacob Turney. And he did, on November 26, 1860, he did a speech where he talked about reason for secession. And to him, the reason to succeed was the northern states were violating the Constitution because they had allowed runaway slaves to stay. You hear a lot about the horrors of the Fugitive Slave Act, but the Fugitive Slave Act was put in place to reinforce the Constitution. The Constitution said that you had to return slaves, and northern states weren't doing it. So they put in the Fugitive Slave Act to clarify what the northern states should do. They still ignored it. And Turney's position was in the election in 1860, all those states that were allowed the votes to count who were ignoring the Constitution, their votes shouldn't count and Lincoln shouldn't have won.
Wow. Huh.
So the part of it, his talk was about slavery. But that the slaves, not that many people actually owned slaves. Vast majority of the people that fought didn't. So the question is, well, they didn't fight because of slavery. why they fight. And well, Turney wrote in there, the one idea of Lincoln's life, and has always been, is to promote the Negro to your level, or rather degrade you to the Negro's level. And he also wrote, the elements of destruction are at work. Black Republicans are the huntsmen. The South is the hunting place. And your constitutional equal rights, the game. So, he argued for slavery, but he also argued that the Black Republicans and Lincoln wanted to make blacks equal to them. And, it was a racist issue. And, they didn't want the Negroes to be the same.
People ask me questions like this before. I've given, I guess, my perspective or my opinion that the Southern aristocracies, I don't think there's any doubt you could argue what their motivation was. As far as each individual person, I think that goes with the man.
Oh yeah.
I don't think Lee. I don't like. I get so aggravated when people say that about Lee. Is fighting for slavery. It's like, no, Lee wasn't. Lee was fighting for Virginia. Had Virginia not left the Union,
right? He wouldn't have left.
Lee would not have left. I mean,
you have to keep in mind that the leaders for succession were arguing for succession, and they were trying to get support for voters so that they would leave. The reasons why individual soldiers fought, it's a totally different discussion.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, totally different. I mean, so when people say the war was started, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to say that, but like I can't think of that. In South Georgia, the Home Guard unit that about 4,000 guys, the old men and little boys that came out to meet Sherman's army. You can't tell me those guys were fighting for
no.
You're not going to. These boys and old men were not fighting for slavery. They were fighting because you had an army of invasion. However you want to look at it from northern or southern perspective, you had an army of invasion walking through your county. They went out to meet them. Before there was war with slavery, and I said, "Well, what was What was the motivation for your first 2 years? Because that was not done until the Emancipation Proclamation." I said, had the South not fired on Fort Sumter, I mean, had Davis stood there and wrote out a proclamation, here, we're giving this back to you, therefore it's not part of South Carolina, or anything like that, there wouldn't have been no motivation. No. I said, but what happened is when they fired on Fort Sumter, that pissed the Northern boys off. So you can say it's noble about keeping the Union together. I said, that didn't have anything to do with it. They got pissed off because you fired on them, and they come down here to take care of it.
And the funny thing about it, in 1792, the Congress passed the Militia Acts. Yeah. And the Militia Acts required every able-bodied white man, 1845, to serve the militia. Constitution puts the militia, state militia, under federal control under certain circumstances. The Militia Acts also required everyone to bring their own weapon. So you talk about the Second Amendment. Well, yeah, Second Amendment's in there so you can buy weapons, and then the government requires you to buy them and bring them to defend yourself. So Lincoln activated it had been updated after that. I don't remember the exact date, but the Militia Acts were still in effect, and putting down a rebellion like Washington did in the Whiskey Rebellion was part of Lincoln's duties and responsibility under the Militia Acts, and that's what he used to invade the South. He had legal authority to do that.
Well, that's a good point, because I've heard people try to argue that it was what he did was illegal, but I've never heard it brought up that he called up the Militia Act. Yeah,
and he had power to. They were under rebellion, and they said, "Well, no, they weren't under rebellion. They succeeded from the Union." Well, and they said it was legal to do that. Well, the only way you decide what something's legal under the Constitution is put it before the Supreme Court. And if the Southern states would have put it before the Supreme Court instead of firing Fort Sumter, we might have had a totally different conversation.
You know what? You're exactly right, because they just ruled on the Dred Scott decision, and that was it was a court. Had they went that route, you're exactly right.
That if there was a war, it'd be a quick war, easy to win. They just took the easy way. They decided, they could beat the North, then we'll just do a little short war and we'll be a separate nation. And we don't have to go through years of trying to deal with the Supreme Court, because it would take years to go through the court.
Anyway, Tom, is there anything you want to add to this, man? I've kept you a long time.
My books are on Amazon, and I would appreciate it if people would consider, looking them up and look at the reviews. Courage on Cemetery Ridge hasn't been out that long. It has 7 reviews, 4.5 stars. I got 1 3-star and 1 4. So, but that's still, I got 1 review on Courage on Cemetery Ridge from a guy who doesn't like Civil War fiction. And it's one of the best reviews I got. So I'm so excited. And one last thing, I write fiction. So if you don't mind, I would like to read a couple paragraphs of fiction I wrote.
I'd love to hear it.
So this is about Jacob Turney. Okay. After the fighting on the second day, they were getting back to the regiment, and like all good Confederates at the time, they were looking for anything they could get off of dead Union soldiers. And this is a little story. Jacob was surprised to see several men from Zimmerman's squad, including his brothers, gathered in a circle. He came up, and they parted, leaving him a path to the center, where a young Yankee sergeant was lying on his back. A huge bloody hole filled with flesh and bone and pieces of cloth covered the right side of his chest. The man's eyes were open, but his pupils were fixed and unseeing. He's still alive, James whispered. At first, Jake thought he was crazy, and then he saw a small stream of bubbles break the surface of the man's chest. Jake didn't think it was possible that someone with such a ghastly wound could somehow still be alive. Then again, another stream of bubbles confirmed the boy was still breathing. Jake knelt next to the boy and close enough they could hear a gurgling sound with the next stream of bubbles. Jake pulled the boy's haversack from around his neck and then his canteen. Jake, you said we would leave the wounded food and water, James said, obviously troubled by his brother's actions. This boy is dead. His body just doesn't know it yet, Jake whispered, as he undid the boy's belt and pulled it free. Albert knelt down and pulled off the boy's shoes and socks. Let's get a move on, Jake said to the rest of the men, and one by one they slowly turned their backs on the dying boy until James was the only one left. He might wake up. We need to at least leave him some water, James said. He's not waking up, Jake said with a tone of finality. James took a deep breath, then he too turned his back on the dying boy and walked away, leaving Albert and Jake to finish stripping him of everything that was useful, but leaving behind his personal items such as his pocket watch and a photograph of a woman about his age holding a small child on her lap. Then they walked away, leaving the boy to die alone.
God, it's pretty powerful.
For anybody who's going to be in Gettysburg on July 2nd, if you want a little distraction, I'm going to be at Civil War and More up in Mechanicsville, the bookstore up there, from 10 to 2. And I'd love to meet people and sign autographs and sell books because, most of the places up in Gettysburg are not doing book signings. I've been in contact with them, but I think with COVID-19, they just haven't opened up yet. So I'm hoping they will between now and July 1st. But I'm going to be in town from the 29th of June to July 6th. And you'll see me out on the battlefield taking a lot of photographs. One I'm looking forward to taking is photographs showing the first Minnesota charge from the Confederate point of view.
That will be a good one from the Confederate point. Okay.
I'm going to do a panorama of that.
Oh, I can't wait to see it. All right, Tom, man, it was great to have you on today. And
thank you.
Look forward to seeing you very soon.
I really appreciate it, and thank you for your time.